Right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are again with the last Sherlock Holmes story, Chapter 2. Here we go. If this narrative of mine ends to sustain the old adage that fact is stranger than fiction, if this was one of the ACD tales, you may be sure that the action would follow fast and furious. If my note showed that such and such case took 3 months to complete, why? A slip of the pen would make it 3 days. And a much more satisfactory story. But this is not a story, and I do not undertake to satisfy those seeking light relief from their daily cares. I must therefore record that during the 2 weeks immediately following the events just described, Holmes and I had nothing more to do with the mystery of the Whitechapel murderer. The reason is, to quote another proverb, is that it never rains but it pours. From the 2nd until the 12th of October, Holmes was unexpectedly occupied with two brief and perhaps rather superficial cases that were respectively convey of the famous racehorse Silver Blaze and the bizarre business of Lord Roberts and Steinman's illusionary wedding. ACD later included both cases in his collection. Arthur Conan Doyle later included both cases in his collection of stories based on my notes, and since the events are in any case quite extraneous to present my purpose, I do not propose to dwell on them any further. I have said that during this period, Holmes and I had nothing more to do with the Ripper murders, but the statement demands qualification. Hardly a literate person in the world, in the country, and certainly no devout newsprint of it ferocious as Holmes could have remained unconscious of every new development in the case, whether substantial or merely sensational. Whatever they may have been to the people of London, the events of the 30th of September were a godsend to the press. Periodicals, notorious for their alien circulations, including several long given up as hopeless by the financial advisers, suddenly sprang to life with the special editions, which were snatched from the press and eagerly pressed before the ink was well dry. And should a copy of the two remain unaccountable on their hands, the newsboys had only to holler, "Murder, ghastly, horrible," to holler, "Murder, ghastly, horrible, mutilations, terrible," etc., and in the twinkling of an eye the shock would be exhausted. The inquest of the two women reported in lurid detail. The leading articles severely criticised the police for their incompetence, while in the correspondent columns theories as to the murderer's motives and identify were heatedly debated. Respectable gentlemen living in sedate suburbans offered their services to the authorities, who were already inundated with letters assuring the writers friends and relations, or merely classing illiterate and often illegible threats. The last class were, for the most part, blatant plagiarisms of the letter signed Jack the Ripper, of which the authorities issued a reproduction in the form of a poster. Following the inquest, the witness depositions were checked. And compared, and the three dissimilar descriptions of the wanted man were issued. A reward of £500 was offered for information leading to his arrest, but all trails proved false. All the openings, blind alleys, and every clue circular and ambiguous. The public mood was an ugly mixture of hatred and terror that was very close to panic. To an outward appearances, Holmes was totally absorbed all this time by the two cases to which I referred, but it was clear to me that his energies were by no means wholly engaged by the problems that presented. One might liken his mood to that of an artist who pauses during the creation of some vast epic canvas to paint a pair of portraits. Light, straightforward, employed only his superb technical skills. While his spirits rested from intense labours and prepared for a renewed struggle. On several occasions he brought up the subject of the double murder, which clearly continued to occupy his thoughts. Thus my notes revealed that at breakfast on Friday the 5th, following his return from Dartmoor on the night express, Holmes looked up from his paper with a triumphant air. Ha! She was going to Bermordsley, Watson. What? Who? Catherine Eddowes, alias Kate Kelly, the Mitre Square victim. I always wondered why she did not go to home go home to her lodging house in Fashion Street. Why then? Why, when they released her, she was seen to go off down Houndsditch. Houndsditch. You know why? Does it matter, Holmes? I inquired grumpily. I tend to be a trifle sullen first thing in the morning, and nothing less is congenial in such times than the vigorous interrogation. Of course it matters. Everything matters. In a case obscure as this, that is, Doctor, unless you are possessed of some private knowledge which allows you to determine what is material, and what is not. I was silent, studying the interior of my egg. My provisional theory, continued Holmes, in his very discursive tone, was that she was going down to the miners, down to the miners, to recoup her finances in the way she knew best. But according to her male companion, one John Kelly, she had a daughter living in Bermondsey, from whom she had spoken earlier on the Saturday morning of borrowing some money. She was in no doubt bound tither when she met up with the killer. I felt obliged to make some comment. What puzzles me is why the murderer is in such a hurry. Why did he not return to his lair and clean himself up, instead of dashing around the streets with bloody hands? He seems to have taken incredible risks for no good reason. His reason was the very best in the world, cried Holmes. He has been foiled, don't you see? The Jews, Domesticus, this common cosmonger, has interfered with his grand designs. He must have been seething with fury as he stalked off in search of a substitute victim. He had to show the police and the public and himself that he was still the same supernatural and impersonal force that the press has made him appear. He had to demonstrate conclusively that his will cannot be thwarted for more than a few minutes. How he must have fretted over this rebuff. How he must have burned to avenge it. You saw the result. Once again I was forced to marvel at Holmes' ability to penetrate to the core of this mystery and to unravel the twisted strands of the murderer's character. As I mentioned above, the authorities issued posters in the wake of the killings, printing a facsimile of the letter Lestrade had shown us together with the postcard in some hand, which had been received in the Central News Agency the day after the murders. A superscription requested any person recognising the writing communicate with the police. Lestrade deposited a copy of the poster at 21B during a visit in the correction with the St Simon affair. I still have it, more than 40 years later. The letter I have already transcribed. The card, which was badly smeared with blood, ran this way. I was not coding, dear old boss, which I gave the tip. You will hear about the saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Sorry, I'll start that again. I was not coding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear more. You'll hear about the saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit. Couldn't finish straight off. Had no time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping the last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper. Holmes wrenched the knife which secured his unanswered correspondence from the mantelpiece, and then drove it angrily back into the wood. Dear old boss, he snapped. Dear old boss, he snapped. Saucy Jackie, what sickening cant. And what a loathsome miscarriage of genius lies behind it all, I tell you, Watson. Just thinking about this man makes me feel queasy. I would to God I might face an army of Grimsby royalitors, rather than spend another instant in the intense company of this pollution. It occurred to me that the murder's reference to his attempt to cut off the woman's ear suggested a parallel with the Cushing case, but I said nothing. In his present mood, Holmes would probably have repelled with some crushing sarcasm to the effect that I at least have always managed to keep my feet flat on the ground, just as at another time I had been guilty of his late outburst. He would have been quite capable of telling me curtly to cut out the emotional gush and stick to the facts. Living with a great man is itself a minor art. On Friday the 12th of October, Holmes introduced Mr. and Mrs. Francis Hay Moulton to Lord Robert St. Simon, thereby bringing to an end his investigation of what Arthur Conan Doyle was to call the adventure of the noble bachelor. For the following week, I saw very little of my friend, after a day or two being scowled at whenever I entered the room and then treated to euphemisms of the excellence of the autumn air, and references to how much my fellow members of the club might be missing me. I took the point and left Holmes to his own devices. These proved exceedingly singular. My glimpses of Holmes were far and few between, but each evening but each was memorable. One evening I returned home to discover him seated Buddha-like on the floor, his eyes fixed unceasingly before him, and the air dark with the highly unexotic incense of smouldering shag. The following day there would be no sign of him, but the next morning he would burst in as I was breakfasting, attiring as a sewer scavenger, complete with the noxious stench. The day after that I had barely turned out George Street when I heard what sounded like a madman playing a fiddle. As I neared number 221, I realised that the noise was emanating from the male rooms, where Holmes was scraping out some dozen notes over and over again, creating a terrible canopy devoid of either harmony or rhythm. On Tuesday, I found him kneeling on the rug in the front room, slashing the body of a suckling pig with a knife from his old medical kit, and then examining the resulting incisions minutely through his magnifying glass. Mrs. Hudson roasted the pig the next evening, but I was obliged to dine alone, since Holmes had not returned from the salt he had made that morning in the character of the Salvation Army. At last, one Saturday morning, left him, and life returned to what passed for normality at 221B Baker Street. I came down to find my friend already savouring his pipe and leafing through the papers. I greeted him minimally and rang for my breakfast. "So, my dear doctor," exclaimed Holmes from behind the Times, "whilst I wear myself out combing London for a murderer, you spend your nights dining off Simpson's beef and qualifying the Bennu of a comic year." I started guiltily. "Pray, how does it go with you, young Stamford?" Holmes continued eventfully. "Stamford? But, my dear Holmes, this is incredible." "Pooh! Elementary, my dear boy. Primo. One landlord informed me last night that you had wired from your club to tell her you would not be home to dinner. Secondo, the piece of paper which you placed on the mantelpiece last night bears an address in a pinner and a large wine stain. Terento, your boots have been out to dry in plain view. You are well acquainted with my methods, so naturally I need not explain the absurdly simple argument leading from this trio of facts to my conclusion, need I? Well, oh, very well then. When a man of your admirable regularity of character decides at the last moment that he will dine from home, we may confidently assume that he has unexpectedly met an acquaintance. In the present case, we may further assume that the meeting occurred at your club, since it was from there you dispatched the telegram. The question therefore becomes whom you might ring run into at the club who could induce you into forego Mrs. Hudson's imitable cuisine. You will see at once that the answer can only be young Stamford. You never cease harping on about the unutterable dreariness of the other members, and only last month you were bemoaning the fact that Stamford's visits to the institution would now be a few and far between, since we had just acquired since we had just acquired a practice in Middlesex. Since he had just acquired a practice in Middlesex, what more likely then that he should be spending the weekends in town, and that the two of you should repair to Simpson's for dinner, in of course of which you jotted down his new address. I fear the explanation is as tedious as it is unnecessary. And there's part 1 of chapter 2, the last Sherlock Holmes story. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm sorry I haven't done a lot of videos over the last few weeks. I must admit I've had 1 or 2 things going on. I had my uncle's funeral a couple of weeks ago, and I've been working. So yeah, I will be back next week with some more videos and part 2 of chapter 2, the last Sherlock Holmes story, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, thank you very much for my new subscribers, and I shall see you again next week, hopefully. Bye bye for now.